Jackson wasn't particularly fond of the idea of dying, nor was he keen on the notion of getting shot in the face today, yet here he was, crouched behind a rusted-out hull of what was once a proud space freighter, debating the merits of a quick death versus a slow one. "You think it's too late to switch sides?" Jackson muttered, peering over the edge to catch a glimpse of the patrol. They were the usual all-shiny helmets and a distinct lack of personality, as if charisma was optional in the Warlord's army recruitment brochure. Vex, his annoyingly positive companion, snorted. "Switch sides. Sure, if you fancy being a mindless drone. I hear the lobotom is free, comes with a complimentary loyalty implant." "Tempting," Jackson replied. "But I've grown attached to the brain cells I have left." The patrol passed, leaving behind the oppressive silence of the Dyson fragment. It was a slice of space hell spun around a dying star, a chunk of civilization squeezed dry by psychic warlords who ruled with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Jackson had seen better days, but then again, he'd also seen worse. "You think she's real?" Vex asked, breaking the silence. Jackson glanced at him, eyebrow raised. "Who? The Tooth Fairy? No, smartass, Myra, the strategist. The one who's supposed to lead us to freedom instead of straight to an early grave." "Oh, her. Yeah, she's real," Jackson said. "Or at least, real enough that I'm willing to risk my neck to find out." The air was tainted with the metallic tang of desperation and burnt circuitry as they made their way deeper into the underbelly of the fragment. Here, humanity clung to survival like a bad habit, an entire rebellion squatting in the shadows, whispering about a mythical savior who might just have a plan crazy enough to work. Eventually, they reached a narrow alley where a door marked with an almost comically large X awaited them, because subtlety, much like mercy, was in short supply these days. "This is it," Vex said. "We go in, we listen, and if we don't like what we hear, we make a run for it." "Running. My favorite pastime," Jackson grumbled. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with a mix of exhausted souls and determined faces. And there, standing at the center, was Myra. She looked like someone who'd seen everything and cared about very little of it. "Welcome," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Take a seat or don't. Suit yourself." Jackson and Vex shuffled in, finding spots among the motley crew of rebels. Myra wasted no time, launching into a speech that was equal parts inspiring and terrifying. "The warlords want us to believe they are invincible," Myra began, pacing with the kind of energy that suggested she hadn't slept since the last millennium. "But they are as flawed as anyone, more so even. They're drunk on power, and like all drunks they have a tendency to stumble." Jackson leaned over to Vex. "She's got away with words, huh?" "Yeah, like a chainsaw's got away with trees," Vex replied. "Here's the plan," Myra continued, ignoring the murmurs. "We hit them where it hurts. We disrupt their supply lines, their communication, their control. We make them afraid. Afraid? They've got psychic powers," someone shouted from the back. "And I've got a hangover," Myra shot back. "But I'm still here and so are you." "Fear's a tool, it's time we wielded it." Jackson couldn't help but chuckle. "She's got guts. Crazy but gutsy." "Remind you of anyone?" Vex asked with a grin. As the meeting wrapped up, Jackson found himself surprisingly optimistic, not because the odds were in their favor, but because they finally had a direction, and it was better than sitting around waiting for the warlords to squash them like bugs. As they filed out, Myra caught his eye. "Jackson, right? Psychic soldier," he nodded, trying to hide his surprise. "That's me." "Good, I could use someone like you," she said, her smile sharp as a razor. "Welcome to the Resistance." On their way back, Vex couldn't resist. "So, how do you feel being the Resistance's new poster boy?" Jackson shrugged. "Feels like I've just signed up for a suicide mission." Vex clapped him on the back. "Aren't those the best kind?" In the distance, the glow of the warlord's fortress loomed, a constant reminder of what they were up against. But for the first time in ages, Jackson felt something other than dread. Hope, he realized, was a stubborn bastard. The mess they were in was no joke. It was a twisted, gnarly jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces didn't fit together so much as they fought each other for space. The warlords controlled everything with their psychic abilities, issuing decrees with all the compassion of a starving shark, and enforcing them with armies of loyalists who'd sell their mother for a pat on the head. "So what's your take?" Vex asked as they settled into their makeshift camp, tucked away in the bowels of the fragment, far from prying eyes and psychic intrusions. Jackson thought for a moment. Myra's either brilliant or insane, probably both, but she's got the right idea. Which part? The part where we stick it to the warlords, or the part where we get blown to bits? The part where we stick it to them, Jackson said. Getting blown to bits is just a perk. Vex laughed, a rare sound in these parts. You know, for a guy who hates getting shot, you sure do love a good fight. What can I say? Jackson shrugged. I've got a soft spot for lost causes. The two of them sat in companionable silence, the kind that came from years of dodging death and sharing whatever scraps they could find. Jackson was aware of the irony in fighting for freedom on a fragmented world, where survival often felt like a losing battle. But there was something in Myra's plan, something that sparked a glimmer of hope. And hope, for all its flaws, was infectious. That night, as they lay under the cold, artificial sky, Jackson found himself wondering what the future held. Maybe they'd succeed, maybe they'd fail. But at least they were doing something. At least they weren't just waiting to die. In the dim glow of their camp, Vex looked over. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Jackson snorted. "Every damn day. No, I mean how humanity got here on this god-forsaken chunk of rock." "Ah, that," Jackson said. "Well, I figure someone out there enjoys a good joke and we're the punchline." "Probably," Vex agreed. But what a hell of a punchline. Jackson closed his eyes, letting the sound of the reactor hum lull him into a restless sleep. Tomorrow they'd begin the impossible task of dismantling the warlord's iron grip. And while the path ahead was fraught with danger, deceit, and the occasional chance of incineration, he couldn't help but think it was worth it. After all, he mused as sleep took him, there were worse ways to go out than trying to kick a few tyrants in the teeth. The alarm was a rude awakening, a blaring reminder that life was a series of unfortunate events strung together by caffeine and bad decisions. "We're up," Vex said, looking far too awake for someone who'd spent the night on a cold metal floor. "Up, not awake," Jackson grumbled, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Let's see what chaos awaits." Their first task was simple enough: sabotage a supply shipment bound for the warlord's fortress. Simple, of course, being a relative term when one's life expectancy was measured in fleeting glimpses of luck. "Ready for a bit of mayhem?" Vex asked as they prepared to move out. Jackson nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I was born ready, or maybe just born, I forget which." As they slipped through the shadows of the fragment, Jackson couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were attempting. It was madness, pure and simple, but then again, madness was the currency in which they traded. The supply depot loomed ahead, guarded by a handful of the warlord's finest. Finest being a generous term for men who looked like they'd traded their brains for a loyalty badge and a shiny gun. "What's the plan?" Vex asked, eyeing the guards. "We distract them with our charm and then blow the place sky high," Jackson replied. "Sounds like a plan," Vex said. "So we wing it. We always do, don't we?" With a smirk, Jackson stepped into the open, drawing the guards' attention. "Hey, fellas. I heard there's a bounty on my head. How about we skip the formalities and you just shoot me now?" The guards hesitated, confusion writ large across their faces. "Or," Jackson continued, "we could do this the hard way." The hard way it was. A firefight erupted, bullets and plasma lacing the air with lethal intent. Jackson moved with practiced ease, his psychic abilities a shield against the storm of violence. Amidst the chaos, Vex slipped past the guards, planting charges with the precision of a man who'd blown up more than his fair share of inconvenient obstacles. "Time to go," Vex shouted, retreating as the countdown ticked ominously in their comms. They made it out just in time, the explosion a glorious testament to the art of improvised demolition. The depot went up in a blaze of fire and twisted metal, a beacon of defiance in the oppressive gloom. "Well," Jackson said, catching his breath. "That went surprisingly well." "Surprisingly," Vex agreed. "But don't get cocky. We've still got a long way to go." As they made their way back to the rebel hideout, Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They'd struck a blow, however small, against the warlords' regime. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in a world where hope was a rare commodity, a start was all they needed. When they returned, Myra was waiting, arms crossed and a wry smile on her lips. "Nice work, boys. You've officially pissed off the warlords." "Just doing our part," Jackson said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Keep it up and we might just stand a chance," Myra said. Jackson nodded, feeling the camaraderie of their shared struggle. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by desperation and a mutual disdain for authority. But maybe, just maybe, they had what it took to change the world. And if not, well, he mused, they were sure as hell going to go out with a bang. Jackson and Vex were back in the makeshift bunker, the scent of burnt metal still hanging around them like an unwashed cloak. Myra stood at the center, as always, looking like she was about to lecture a group of delinquent space cadets rather than lead a rebellion. She gestured for them to gather, her voice just a shade above sardonic. "Good news, bad news time," she announced. "Good news is, the warlords are squirming. Bad news, they're stepping up their psychic surveillance. We're going to need something a little more creative." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Creative? We talking interpretive dance?" "I hear nothing confuses the enemy like a soft shoe routine." Myra's gaze sharpened, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Funny, but no, I'm talking about memes." Jackson blinked. "Excuse me, did you just suggest we outwit psychic warlords with internet jokes?" "Not just any jokes," Myra replied, arms crossed. "We need subversive humor. Humor that infiltrates, undermines, and makes them doubt their own propaganda. If we can spread enough dissent through their networks, we might just get them to crack." "Memes as weapons," Vex echoed, shaking his head with a grin. "This is officially the stupidest rebellion I've ever been part of." "Stupid, but possibly brilliant," Jackson admitted, scratching his chin. "We've tried everything else. Hell, if a well-placed joke can get a psychic to laugh themselves into a coma, I'm all for it." Myra nodded, serious again. "The warlords hate unpredictability. They thrive on control. Human creativity, humor, it's alien to them. If we can make their soldiers laugh, question, and maybe even think for themselves, we'll be doing the galaxy a favor," Jackson finished. "So what's the plan?" "Send them a video of a cat playing the saxophone close," Myra said. "We hijack their broadcasts, feed them our own material. The tricky part is making it stick." Vex leaned back, hands behind his head. "And how exactly do we get our memes into their tight-knit communications?" "That," Myra said, "is where you come in, Jackson. Your psychic talents will help us seed these messages directly into their communications without setting off too many alarms." Jackson snorted. "So I'm the delivery boy for jokes now? Great. I always wanted to be a stand-up comic. Think of it as a public service," Myra replied with a wink. "Besides, if it works, we might just get the warlord's own troops on our side." Jackson thought about it. It was, admittedly, a bizarre plan, but there was a sort of twisted logic to it. The idea that something as simple as humor could topple regimes was almost poetic. Almost. "Well, I'm game," he said at last. "Just tell me where to point and laugh." Vex chuckled. "I knew you'd come around. Always knew you were a sucker for bad puns. A sucker with a death wish, maybe," Jackson muttered. "But fine, I'll give it a shot." "What's our first target?" Myra pulled up a hologram, highlighting a particularly ugly section of the Dyson fragment. "This supply hub. It's their primary broadcast node. We need to get you close enough to piggyback off their existing signal." Jackson studied the layout, noting the heavy guard presence. "Getting in won't be easy. These guys are about as subtle as a punch in the face." Vex shrugged. "Nothing a little distraction won't fix, for you maybe," Jackson said. "I'll just be the idiot trying to upload dad jokes into the warlord's mainframe." "That's the spirit," Myra said with a laugh. "Now let's get to work. We've got a world to confuse. They moved through the fragment's underbelly like ghosts, the labyrinthine corridors echoing with the constant hum of machinery. Jackson couldn't shake the absurdity of their mission, risking life and limb to deliver the galaxy's worst jokes to its most dangerous rulers. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so damn likely to get them killed. Think they'll appreciate the humor? Vex asked, his voice a low murmur as they crept along. Oh, I'm sure they'll laugh, Jackson replied. Right before they incinerate us, they reached the broadcast node, a fortress of steel and circuitry, bristling with guards. The place looked like it was designed by someone with a fetish for unnecessary artillery. All right, Vex said, pointing to a weak spot in the perimeter. That's our way in. You ready to become the galaxy's most infamous jokester? Jackson took a deep breath. Born ready, or just born, Vex quipped. Jackson grinned despite himself. Yeah, let's do this. They slipped into the node, the guards none the wiser thanks to a well-timed diversion involving a few explosives and some creative pyrotechnics. Jackson moved quickly, weaving through the labyrinthine halls towards the nerve center. The control room was a hive of activity, technicians buzzing about like bees in a particularly aggressive hive. Jackson slipped in unnoticed, his psychic abilities bending the light around him just enough to mask his presence. Here goes nothing, he muttered, hands dancing over the console like a pianist with a grudge. He tapped into the network, uploading the first batch of subversive content. Videos, images, jokes, anything that would play havoc with the psychic overlord's tightly woven narrative. Jackson felt a thrill of satisfaction as he hit send, watching as the data streamed into the heart of their communications array. All right, it's done, he whispered into his comm. Let's get out before someone decides to take their job seriously. Vex's voice crackled back, full of mischief. Copy that. Exit strategy coming right up. They retraced their steps, slipping past the guards with the confidence of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. As they made their way back to the surface, Jackson couldn't help but wonder if any of it would work. Think they're laughing yet? Vex asked as they emerged into the cool, artificial night. If they are not, we'll just try harder, Jackson said. Maybe next time we should send them a song and dance routine, Vex grinned. I'll start practicing my tap dance. Back at the base, Myra was waiting, a glint of excitement in her eyes. Well, it's done, Jackson said. Now we wait and see if the universe has a sense of humor. Myra nodded, thoughtful. It's a start. If we can sow enough doubt, maybe we can turn this thing around, or die trying, Jackson added. But hey, at least we'll die laughing. They settled in for the night, the weight of their actions hanging over them like a storm cloud. Jackson lay awake, staring at the cold, unfeeling ceiling, wondering if they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. But somewhere deep down, he felt a flicker of hope. If humor could be a weapon, maybe there was a future worth fighting for. Hey, Jackson, Vex murmured from his bunk, breaking the silence. You ever think we'll see the end of this? Jackson considered the question, the enormity of it settling over him like a shroud. Probably not, he admitted. But we'll sure as hell give them something to remember. Damn right, Vex said, a smile in his voice. And with that, Jackson let himself drift off to sleep, dreams filled with the chaos they'd sown, and the unlikely hope that they might just pull this off. Jackson sat in a corner of the makeshift bunker, his eyes glued to a small, flickering screen. Vex was beside him, sprawled out in a position that looked both uncomfortable and completely natural. Myra stood over them, arms crossed, surveying the chaos they had unleashed on the Warlords' communications network. The room smelled like burnt metal and bad decisions. Look at this one, Vex chuckled, pointing at the screen. It's a picture of a warlord on a toilet captioned "Psychic powers can't unclog this mess." Jackson snorted. Subtle. Well, if subtlety was our style, we wouldn't be here, Vex replied. Also, I'm pretty sure that picture just became the most viewed meme in the Dyson fragment. Myra rolled her eyes but couldn't quite hide her smile. Focus. We need to know if this is working. Jackson tapped a few keys, pulling up reports. Looks like it's spreading faster than a cold in a kindergarten. People are sharing these like candy, and the psychic warlords. Myra asked, leaning in. Jackson shrugged. Hard to tell. But if I had to guess, they're probably not holding a comedy night. Vex grinned. Or maybe they are, and we're the headliners. Here's hoping we don't get booed off stage with lasers, Jackson muttered, scanning more data. The idea that they could destabilize an oppressive regime with humor was as insane as it was brilliant. But then again, insanity and brilliance were roommates in the rebellion's dingy little apartment. Speaking of booze, Vex said, we've got some chatter from the population. They're seeing the humor, but more importantly, they're questioning the propaganda. Good, Myra nodded. If we can make them doubt their loyalty, we might just get a few to switch sides, or at least not immediately shoot us, Jackson added. Which, frankly, is all I'm asking for in a person. For a moment, the three of them basked in their small victory. But it was short-lived. The screen flashed red, a siren blaring briefly before Jackson silenced it. What's that? Vex asked, suddenly alert. Jackson's expression darkened. Psychic surveillance is picking up. Looks like they've noticed something's off. Can they trace it back to us? Myra asked, her voice carefully neutral. Maybe. Or maybe they'll just assume their soldiers have developed a sudden case of bad taste in jokes. Either way, we need to be careful. Careful's our middle name, Vex said, stretching his arms. Right between reckless and suicidal. Jackson couldn't help but grin. Don't forget underpaid, wouldn't dream of it, Vex replied. Myra sighed, but there was warmth in her eyes. We should move the base. If they're closing in, it's only a matter of time before they sniff us out, Jackson nodded. I'll start packing. Make sure we leave behind only the essentials, like the stash of snacks we've been hoarding. Vex joked. More like our dignity, Jackson shot back. But yeah, the snacks too, they went to work, the familiar routine of packing up a base they barely called home. In the rebellion, stability was a luxury they couldn't afford. The only thing more temporary than their bases was their sense of security. Do you think they'll actually start laughing? Vex asked, breaking the silence as they packed. Who, the warlords? Jackson shook his head. They've got the sense of humor of a black hole. But if even a few of their drones start questioning orders, it's worth it. Hard to argue with that, Vex said, stuffing a worn backpack with supplies. You ever think about what'll happen if this actually works? Jackson paused, considering it. I try not to. Thinking ahead in this line of work is like planning your retirement in a war zone. But yeah, sometimes I imagine it. And I imagine we'll have an entire galaxy to annoy, Jackson replied with a grin. Vex laughed. Sounds like a plan. Enough daydreaming, Myra called from across the room. We need to move before their psychics pinpoint us. Right, Jackson said, hoisting his pack onto his shoulder. Let's get out of here before someone decides we're not worth the hassle. They slipped out into the dim corridors of the Dyson fragment, the endless maze of their rebellion. Moving from one hideout to the next was second nature, the tedium occasionally broken by the thrill of narrowly avoiding psychic hunters. It was like being on a holiday, if your idea of a vacation involved perpetual danger and the occasional firefight. As they navigated the shadowed paths, Jackson's mind wandered back to their mission. The absurdity of it gnawed at him, a rebellion fueled by memes. Yet the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Humor was their greatest weapon because it was the one thing the warlords couldn't control. Think they'll come after us directly? Vex asked, breaking the silence. Maybe. But they'd have to admit they're scared of a bunch of jokes, Jackson said. And if they do, it means we're winning. Vex smirked. Imagine going down in history as the warlord who lost to a meme. History's written by the victors, Jackson replied. If we win, we'll make sure they are remembered as the galaxy's biggest punchline. They reached their new base, a cramped, damp corner of the Dyson fragment that smelled slightly better than a locker room after a marathon. Myra immediately set to work organizing their supplies, while Jackson and Vex scouted the perimeter. Home sweet home, Vex said sarcastically. Yeah, nothing says luxury like mold and questionable stains, Jackson agreed. Once they were settled, Jackson sat down to monitor their progress. Reports came in sporadically, snippets of data that painted a picture of growing unrest. Their memes were spreading, infecting the minds of the warlord's soldiers. It was working. "Looks like they're starting to lose control," Jackson reported, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Good. Let's keep the pressure on," Myra said. "If we can keep them on the back foot, we'll have a chance." Jackson nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he prepared the next wave of content. "We'll give them a show they'll never forget." But as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on borrowed time. The warlords wouldn't sit idly by, they'd strike back with everything they had. And when they did, the rebellion would need more than just humor to survive. "Hey, Jackson," Vex called from across the room. "You ever think about what you'd do if this all ended tomorrow?" Jackson considered the question, the weight of it settling over him like a shroud. "Honestly, probably find a quiet corner of the galaxy and sleep for a decade," Vex laughed. "Sounds nice. But you get bored true," Jackson admitted. "Guess I'd have to find a new way to annoy the powers that be. Some things never change," Vex said with a grin. Jackson smiled back, the camaraderie of their shared struggle a small comfort in the chaos. Even if their rebellion was doomed to fail, they'd go down fighting and laughing. The next day, the psychic backlash hit them like a tidal wave. Reports flooded in from across the Dyson fragment. Surveillance drones were everywhere, scanning the populace for signs of dissent. The warlords weren't laughing, they were pissed. "Myra, we've got a problem," Jackson said, staring at the screen. "They're doubling down on surveillance. If we're not careful, they'll find us." Myra frowned, her mind already working through the implications. "We need to stay ahead of them. Keep spreading the memes, but be ready to move at a moment's notice." "Business as usual then," Vex said, checking his gear. "Just with a few more death threats." "Exactly," Myra replied, her tone grim. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, I've always wanted to be the most wanted man in the galaxy." "Congratulations," Vex said. "You're officially a celebrity." "Great," Jackson muttered. "Just what I always wanted." Despite the danger, a part of him relished the challenge. Everything was on the line, and failure wasn't an option. They had to succeed, not just for themselves, but for everyone living under the warlord's oppressive regime. As the days passed, the tension grew. The warlords were relentless, their surveillance tightening like a noose. But the rebellion pressed on, their humor a beacon in the darkness. "This is madness," Jackson said one night, staring at the screen. "Madness is what we do best," Vex replied, his voice light despite the situation. "And if we're crazy enough, we just might win." Jackson nodded, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. But as he glanced around at his friends, he felt a surge of defiance. They were in this together, and together they'd change the world or die trying. "Here's to madness, then," Jackson said, raising an imaginary glass. Vex clinked his own invisible drink. "To madness." And with that they returned to their work, determined to see their plan through to the bitter end. If humor could topple tyrants, then they'd keep fighting, one joke at a time. The makeshift bunker was as cozy as you'd expect from a place that smelled like someone's socks had declared independence and formed their own republic. Jackson, Vex, and Myra sat huddled around the screen, which flickered like it was having an existential crisis every few seconds. Jackson's fingers danced over the keyboard, a digital conductor orchestrating chaos. "Do you ever stop to think about how ridiculous this all is?" Vex asked, leaning back in his chair, which creaked in protest like it was considering early retirement. "Every damn day," Jackson replied. "But then I remember, if we piss the warlords off enough for them to try killing us, we must be doing something right." "Small victories," Vex said, nodding sagely. "Like finding a cold spot on your mattress in the middle of the night." Myra cut in, her voice all business. "We've got bigger problems than the rebellion's lack of luxury accommodations." "I've been monitoring Jackson's psychic readings, and it looks like they are evolving." "Evolving, huh?" Vex quipped. "I always knew Jackson was a bit of an overachiever." Jackson rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I was hoping my superpower would be something cooler like flying or shooting lasers. Instead, I get what?" Psychic spoon-bending, Myra leaned forward, her face serious. It's more than that. You're picking up on the warlord's plans. There's a new player in town, a warlord named Threx. He's developing a counter-meme strategy, counter-meme. Vex chuckled. What's he going to do, make a no-laughing zone? Maybe, Myra said, not sharing in the joke, but he's not just any warlord. He's smart and he's pissed. He wants to shut us down for good, so what's the plan? Jackson asked, trying to ignore the pit forming in his stomach. We adapt. We outsmart them, Myra said, her voice steady. Just like we've always done. But we need to be faster, more unpredictable. Great, Jackson muttered. Because that's been so easy up until now. The screen flashed again, displaying an incoming message. Jackson tapped a few keys, pulling up a report from one of their field agents. Looks like our memes are still spreading, but Threx has started deploying squads to round up anyone caught laughing. Talk about a sense of humor bypass, Vex said. What do? Install a laughter detector in everyone's skull. Wouldn't put it past them, Jackson replied. But it means our window's closing. We need to hit them harder and faster. All right, Myra said, taking charge. We'll need a new batch of content, something they can't ignore or counter quickly. Vex, I want you to work on that. Sure thing, Vex agreed, already plotting out ideas in his head. I always wanted to write something that could start a revolution. Jackson, Myra continued, I need you to focus on those psychic abilities. See if you can tap into more of what they're doing. If Threx is planning a big move, we need to know about it. Right, Jackson said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a heavy cloak. I'll do my best, but no promises on not frying my brain. Just don't fry mine by association, Vex said, giving Jackson a mock-serious look. They spent the next few hours buried in their respective tasks, the room filled with the sound of rapid keystrokes, punctuated by the occasional sarcastic comment or dark joke. In the rebellion, humor was their lifeline, a way to keep the madness at bay. Got something, Vex announced, breaking the silence. A new meme format. It's a play on the warlord's propaganda, but with a twist. Should get under their skin. Good, Myra said, scanning the details. Let's get it out there. The sooner we hit them, the better. As Vex worked on distributing their latest creation, Jackson closed his eyes, trying to tune into the psychic frequencies humming just at the edge of his consciousness. It was like trying to catch a far-off radio station in a storm, static and snippets of sound cutting in and out. He focused, sifting through the noise until he caught a thread, a voice, cold and calculating, speaking in clipped tones. Threx. Jackson's mind latched onto the words, filtering out the interference. Increase patrols, capture the ringleaders, shut down their network. Jackson opened his eyes, blinking away the haze. Threx is planning to eliminate anyone involved with us. Roundups, interrogations. They're stepping up their game, damn, Vex said, shaking his head. Looks like they're rolling out the red carpet with the spikes on it. Myra's expression hardened. We need to warn our people. Get them to ground before Threx's squads move in. Jackson nodded, already typing out messages to their contacts. On it. Let's hope they're faster than Threx's thugs, speed and luck, two things we're always short on, Vex said with a wry smile. They worked through the night, sending out warnings and coordinating their next steps. Exhaustion pulled at Jackson's eyelids, but he pushed it aside. There was no room for fatigue in a galaxy that wanted them dead. As dawn crept over the Dyson fragment, casting everything in a sickly glow, they finally paused. Jackson leaned back, rubbing his temples. How's the head? Myra asked, concern edging her voice. Like I've been headbutting a brick wall, Jackson admitted, but I'm still here. Good. We need you, Myra said, offering a rare smile. We'll get through this. Yeah, Jackson said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. One meme at a time, they gathered around the screen again, watching as reports filtered in. Their warnings had reached most of their allies, and the memes were spreading faster than Threx could stomp them out. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. We need more reach, Vex said, frowning at the data. Something that'll make even Threx hesitate. Any ideas? Jackson asked, though he already knew the answer was likely no. Vex shrugged. We could release a meme about how Threx secretly loves cuddling kittens. That'd be hard to shake off. Or we could try something a tad more realistic, Myra said dryly. Focus on breaking the loyalty implants. If we can guide the drones to question their programming. That's a tall order, Jackson said, scratching his chin. But it might just work. Tall orders are our specialty, Vex added. Along with sarcastic commentary and wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row, they spent the next few hours brainstorming, each idea more outlandish than the last. But that was the point, pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo. As they worked, Jackson's thoughts drifted to Threx. The warlord was a different beast, cunning and ruthless, with a streak of sadism that made him dangerous. He wouldn't rest until he'd crushed their rebellion under his boot. Got something, Jackson said, gesturing to the screen. A way to mess with the implants. It's risky, but if we can pull it off, Myra leaned over, studying the data. It could work, but we'll need a test subject, someone who's willing to risk their mind. Vex looked up, his expression serious for once. I'll do it. If it means sticking it to Threx, I'm all in, are you sure? Jackson asked, meeting Vex's eyes. Vex nodded. Yeah. Besides, if it goes wrong, maybe I'll finally understand why you love headbutting brick walls. It was a gamble, one that could cost them everything. But in a galaxy where everything was a risk, it was a chance they had to take. They spent the rest of the day preparing, crafting the digital equivalent of guided chaos. As the sun set, bathing the fragment in an eerie darkness, Vex took his place in front of the screen, ready to become their guinea pig. Remember, Myra said, her voice steady, we're here. If anything goes wrong, we'll pull you out. Got it, Vex said, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. Jackson activated the program, watching as lines of code scrolled across the screen. It was like watching a symphony of chaos, beautiful and terrifying in its complexity. Vex sat perfectly still, his face a mask of concentration. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each second a test of patience and resolve. Finally, Vex exhaled, his eyes snapping open. Whoa, what is it? Jackson asked, heart pounding. Vex blinked, a slow grin spreading across his face. I think I just saw inside the warlords' heads. And let me tell you, they've got some seriously repressed issues. The room erupted into laughter, the tension breaking like a dam. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Looks like it worked, Myra said, relief softening her features. Now we just need to spread it. Already on it, Jackson said, typing furiously. Let's see how Threx likes being the butt of the joke. With their new weapon in hand, they prepared to launch their most ambitious campaign yet. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had their determination. The rebellion was far from over, and with Threx in their sights, they were ready to fight back with everything they had. One meme at a time, they'd make sure the galaxy remembered their names, if only as a punchline. Here's to being a pain in the ass, Vex said, raising an imaginary toast. To being relentless, Myra added, clinking her own invisible glass. Jackson joined in, the camaraderie giving him strength. To not going quietly. And with that they returned to their work, a ragtag team of rebels changing the universe with laughter and defiance, one irreverent joke at a time. The makeshift bunker was as cozy as ever, that is, if you found comfort in the smell of burnt rubber and recycled air. Our ragtag band of rebels sat hunched over flickering screens that seemed more interested in their existential crisis than displaying anything useful. The air was thick with tension, a sensation as palpable as the grease stains on Vex's perpetually worn t-shirt. Got another one, Vex announced, his voice laced with dark amusement. Threx's latest meme has just hit the network. It's a doozy, something about how laughing makes your brain rot. Because of course he's turned into the galaxy's worst stand-up comedian. Jackson sighed, rubbing his temples. Great. Just what we needed. As if our people weren't already feeling like the universe's punching bag. We knew Threx was going to hit back hard, Myra said, her tone all business as usual. But we can't let this stop us. The screen sputtered in agreement, momentarily showing an image before collapsing back into static. Fitting, really. A visual metaphor for their current situation. Let's face it, Vex chuckled, though there was no real humor in it. We're like a bad joke that's overstayed its welcome. But damned if we're not going to keep telling it. Nice pep talk, Jackson said dryly. You should take it on tour. Maybe hit some of the more miserable corners of the galaxy. Misery loves company, right? Vex shot back with a grin. Amidst the gallows humor, Jackson's mind churned with doubt. Every step forward felt like wading through quicksand, each success undermined by a new, cunning stratagem from Threx. The pit in his stomach was becoming an all-too-familiar sensation, a constant reminder of their precarious position. He closed his eyes, trying to tune into the psychic chatter buzzing at the edge of his thoughts. It was a cacophony of fear and resolve, a testament to the rebellion's frayed nerves and iron will. Through the chaos, one thought rang clearer than the rest. They were running out of time. They're losing heart, Jackson said, opening his eyes with a sigh. Threx's counter-memes are eating away at our morale. Then we hit them with something they can't ignore, Myra said. Her voice was steady, a beacon in the storm. We adapt, remember, adapt, yeah, Jackson echoed, his mind racing. They needed something big, something unprecedented. A move so audacious that even Threx would have to pause before retaliating. Got any bright ideas? Vex asked, raising an eyebrow. Or are we going to keep playing the same old broken record? Maybe it's time to break the player, Jackson replied, a hesitant idea taking shape. We need to undermine the very foundation of Threx's control, something like implant hacking. Myra asked, her interest piqued despite herself. Exactly, but more than that. Jackson paused, considering the implications. We need to make them laugh, Vex snorted. Say what? Laughter, real laughter, is unpredictable, Jackson explained, his voice gaining confidence. It's human, something the warlords can't truly understand or control. If we can spread a meme that makes even the most hardened soldiers crack a smile, that's a tall order, Myra said, though there was a hint of admiration in her gaze. But it might just work. We'd need something universal, something that cuts through fear, something like a knock-knock joke. Vex suggested, his eyes glinting with mischief. You and your knock-knock jokes, Jackson said, shaking his head, but maybe you're onto something. We need to take the piss out of Threx's authority. Challenge accepted, Vex declared. I'll work on a script that'll have even the scanners in stitches. While you're doing that, Myra said, her eyes narrowing in focus, I'll work on distributing it through our network. We need to reach every corner of the Dyson fragment. Jackson nodded, a plan forming in his mind. It was a risk, sure, but when wasn't it? In this universe, where survival was a cosmic joke at best, they had no choice but to keep laughing. As they settled into their respective tasks, the bunker filled with the soft hum of determination. Jackson let his fingers dance across the keys, sending out feelers through the psychic network. It was a delicate process, like threading a needle in a sandstorm, but he'd grown accustomed to the challenge. He tuned into snippets of conversation, catching fragments of Threx's latest plots. The warlord was relentless, deploying squads with the single-mindedness of a rabid dog. But beneath the bravado there was a flicker of doubt, a chink in the armor that Jackson could exploit. We're getting through, he said, glancing at Myra. Threx is nervous. He knows we're close to something big. Good, she replied, her voice laced with grim satisfaction. Then let's give him something to really worry about. Jackson returned to his work, channeling every ounce of his psychic ability into crafting their weapon of mass mirth. It was a tightrope walk, balancing humor and defiance, but he was determined to make it work. Threx wouldn't know what hit him until he was too busy laughing to care. Hours passed in a blur of creativity and desperation, their bunker a hive of frenetic energy. As the final piece fell into place, Jackson leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. How's it going? Vex asked, looking up from his terminal. Done, Jackson said, a weary smile tugging at his lips. Now we just need to see if it works. Yeah. And if it doesn't, at least we'll have a front row seat to our own execution, Vex joked, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension. Always the optimist, Jackson replied, clapping Vex on the shoulder. But let's go with the assumption that it'll work. the three of them gathered around the central screen, their makeshift command center. Jackson input the final command, sending their humor-laden payload into the ether. "Here goes nothing," he said, fingers hovering over the keys. With a deep breath, he pressed enter. The file zipped across the network, spreading like wildfire through the Dyson fragment. It was a meme, a joke, a challenge to the oppressive order that had held them in thrall for too long. In the silence that followed, tension hung heavy in the air, a tangible force pressing down on them. "We need to monitor the response," Myra said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "See if it sticks." Jackson nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a gamble, a roll of the cosmic dice. But it was all they had, a weapon forged from laughter in a universe that had forgotten how to smile. Minutes ticked by, each second an eternity. The screen flickered, displaying reports of laughter erupting across the fragment. It was working. Against all odds, it was working. "Look at that," Vex said, his voice tinged with awe. "They're actually laughing. It's beautiful," Jackson replied, a grin splitting his face. A symphony of defiance. The moment was fleeting, a brief reprieve in a galaxy determined to crush them. But it was enough. Enough to fan the flames of rebellion, to spark hope where there had been none. As the reports continued to pour in, Jackson felt the doubts clawing at his mind begin to recede. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. But they'd bought themselves time, a chance to regroup and strike back harder than ever before. "I think we just pissed off a lot of people in very high places," Vex said, his grin matching Jackson's. "Good," Myra replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "That's exactly what we wanted." Jackson exhaled, the weight on his shoulders lifting ever so slightly. They'd pulled it off. Against all logic and reason, they'd turned the tide of battle with a joke. As they celebrated their small victory, Jackson knew that the real fight was still ahead. Threx wouldn't take this lightly, and when he came, he'd come with everything he had. But for now, they had laughter on their side, a weapon no warlord could ever truly understand or control. "Here's to the power of bad jokes," Vex said, raising an imaginary toast once more. "To resilience," Myra added, her eyes meeting Jackson's with unspoken determination. "To turning the tide," Jackson finished, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. With a shared nod, they returned to their work, their resolve steeled for the battles to come. The war was far from over, but they were ready to fight it with everything they had, one irreverent joke at a time. The makeshift bunker clung to life like a rat to its last scrap of cheese, and inside, its mismatched inhabitants were huddled around the screen, flickering like a light bulb on its last leg, as usual. Jackson was fiddling with the settings, trying to squeeze more function out of it than a 40-year-old toothbrush. Vex, lounging with the grace of an overcooked noodle, watched with his signature dark grin. "You sure it won't blow us up?" Vex asked, with the enthusiasm of someone asking if their sandwich might kill them. "Only one way to find out," Jackson replied, hitting a button labeled with something that might have translated to whoops in a dead language. The screen crackled, showing a scrambled mess that somehow reflected the state of their rebellion. "You know," Vex continued, "this whole joke as a weapon bit is hilarious. Except not in the ha-ha way, more in the you'll laugh or cry category. A choice between tears and hysterics," Myra added. "Our staple diet since this mess began." Jackson shot them both a look. "If you've got a better idea, I'd love to hear it." Vex leaned back, t-shirt stained with the evidence of his last 3 meals, or was it 4? "Just saying, our plan hanging on a pun is as sturdy as a wet tissue paper in a monsoon." But as they bickered, the screen began to clear. Jackson felt a twinge of something that might have been optimism if it hadn't been so alien to him. The meme had started to circulate, and reports from the psychic network were buzzing in. Threx's grip was slipping, one chuckle at a time. "Incoming transmission," Myra announced, her voice cutting through the static-laden air. It was a mix of hope and skepticism, the modern cocktail. The screen showed a map of the Dyson fragment, little icons blinking with reports from the ground. Laughter, the kind that spiraled out of control, infecting whole squads of the warlord's army. There was something beautiful about it, like watching dominoes fall, one after another. "Looks like Threx's got his hands full," Vex quipped, nodding at the reports. "I'd kill to see his face right now." "Careful," Jackson replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "He's still got plenty of tricks up those metaphorical sleeves. We're just kicking the hive. The real sting comes later." "You're just a ray of sunshine, Jackson," Vex said, smirking. "It's a talent," Jackson grinned back, flipping through the reports. "But if laughter is a weapon, we've just upgraded from a pointy stick to a nuke. Doesn't mean they'll stop trying to stuff that laughter right back down our throats," Myra said, her voice hardening with resolve. "We need to stay on guard, keep the momentum." "You mean keep making idiots out of them?" Vex asked. "Because I'm down for that. I've got a whole arsenal of bad jokes. Anyone who's seen you in action knows that," Jackson replied dryly. "But keep 'em coming. It's working." Hours passed, the bunker filled with the rhythmic clatter of keyboards and the muffled hum of distant machinery. It was the sound of rebellion, grim and determined, sharpening its edges on the whetstone of necessity. Vex, for one, was enjoying the chaos in a way only someone who had nothing left to lose could. "You ever think we're the universe's comedy act?" he asked, stretching his arms like a man preparing to dive into insanity. "More like the universe's punchline," Jackson shot back, eyes still glued to the screen. "But hey, if it keeps us alive, I'm all for it." As they monitored the reports, it became clear the meme was more than a jab at Threx's ego. It was a mirror, reflecting the absurdity of the warlord's control. And the people, the poor saps who had been dancing to Threx's tune for too long, were finally beginning to see it. "It's spreading," Myra pointed out, her voice tinged with something close to relief. "They're starting to question more than just Threx. First laughter, then revolution. It's the natural order," Vex said, looking almost philosophical if you squinted. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Jackson warned, though he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. "We've got them on the back foot, but they are far from down." "Never thought my terrible sense of humor would be humanity's last hope," Vex mused. "Feels like a bad sitcom, doesn't it?" "A sitcom where the series finale includes our heads on pikes," Myra added, ever the realist. Jackson turned back to the screen, massaging the tension from his temples, trying to tune in deeper into the psychic mess that was their network. It was a minefield of fear and doubt, but amidst it, there was a thread of confidence, slim but strong, weaving its way through the chaos. And then he felt it, a shift, subtle but undeniable. The laughter was doing more than lifting spirits. It was fraying the edges of Threx's control, like an itch that couldn't be scratched. His fingers flew across the keys, diving into the deeper currents of thought that swirled around the Dyson fragment. There was power there, power he hadn't dared to tap into before, but necessity had a way of pushing boundaries. "What's that look?" Vex asked, noticing Jackson's concentration. "Just seeing if I can grab onto something new," Jackson said, not entirely sure what he was hoping to find. "We need more than just jokes to tip the scales. We need to hit them where it really hurts. Threx doesn't have a funny bone, so we need to find whatever he's got left that can break," Myra agreed, watching the process with wary eyes. Jackson focused, pulling at the threads of psychic energy that ran through the fragment like veins. It was a risky move, like trying to steer a starship with a blindfold on, but he could feel something, an opening, a chink in the armor. "There," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "That's it, that's the key." "What?" Vex leaned in, curiosity piqued. "His network. Threx is armored up like a bunker, but there's a flaw," Jackson explained, feeling the adrenaline of discovery wash over him. "He's been too reliant on his drones, his memes. We can bleed through that. We infiltrate his own system." Myra asked, quick to see the potential. "Use his tools against him." "Exactly," Jackson nodded, already forming a plan. "If we can hijack his network, make it sing our tune instead of his, we can turn this uprising into a full-scale revolt." Vex grinned, the kind of grin that usually preceded one of his infamous knock-knock jokes. "I like it. Let's turn his own circus into a carnival of chaos." "Okay, so we've got a plan," Jackson said, feeling the buzz of fate's wheel turning. Now we just need to execute it without getting ourselves spaced. No promises, Vex replied, but his confidence was infectious. The team got to work, unity in their shared madness. Threx had unwittingly handed them the keys to his kingdom, and they intended to use it to burn his empire from the inside out. As the Iors dragged on, they hacked, coded, and rigged their way into Threx's network with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. But subtlety wasn't their forte, chaos was. Finally, Jackson sat back, the final line of code inputted. "All right," he said, feeling the weight of the moment settle over the room. "Time to see if our little joke goes viral. Here's hoping the punchline isn't our own demise," Vex quipped, though his eyes were bright with anticipation. With a deep breath, Jackson hit the final command. The meme, now a beast of its own, surged through Threx's system, flipping scripts, corrupting files, and generally causing the kind of havoc that their rebellion thrived on. It was a brilliant, beautiful disaster. Reports flooded in faster than they could process. Threx's forces were in disarray, laughter turning to confusion, orders lost in a sea of conflicting commands. "Myra, start the broadcast," Jackson instructed, knowing this was their chance to rally the people. She nodded, fingers flying over her terminal, sending their message out across the fragment. "People of the Dyson fragment," she began, her voice strong and unwavering. "You've seen the cracks in their control. You felt the power of your own laughter. Now it's time to rise." The response was immediate, a groundswell of support that threatened to topple the warlords from their thrones. It was messy, chaotic, and perfect in its imperfection. Amidst it all, Jackson couldn't help but laugh, the sound foreign and strange in his own ears. But it was real, and it was theirs. "We did it," Vex said, disbelief mixing with triumph. "It's not over," Jackson reminded him, though the grin on his face said otherwise. "But we've given them something to really worry about." In that moment of shared victory, they were more than rebels. They were the punchline to Threx's joke, a joke that had taken on a life of its own and turned the tables on the puncher. As the screen filled with reports of the uprising, Jackson felt something shift within him. A lightness, an easing of the ever-present weight on his shoulders. They had made their stand, and for once, the universe was laughing with them, not at them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them fighting another day. And in a universe as grim and unforgiving as theirs, that was the biggest joke of all. The bunker was buzzing like a hive of caffeinated bees, each rebel hunched over flickering screens like medieval scribes drafting the gospel of laughter. Jackson could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to choke an elephant, or whatever passed for an elephant in this solar system. The meme campaign was their final shot, a desperate Hail Mary to send Threx's empire crashing down around his ears. "All right, people," Jackson said, rubbing his temples like he could massage out the existential dread. "Let's make this meme hit harder than a planetary collision." Vex, with his usual dark grin, was already tapping away at his keyboard. "I've got just the thing," he said, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Remember that time Threx tried to convince everyone he was just like them because he wore civilian clothes for a day?" "Don't remind me," Myra groaned. "Looked like a death worm in a Sunday dress." "Exactly," Vex said, typing with the speed of a man possessed. "We'll take that image, slap on some text about how his empathy training obviously didn't stick, and boom, instant comedy." Jackson chuckled despite himself. "You're a menace, Vex, but a useful one." The room was a riot of chaotic energy, rebels shouting out ideas like a particularly hostile brainstorming session. The memes were coming together, each one a weapon sharper than any blade. Jackson watched as their collective creativity morphed into a tidal wave of humor, ready to crash on Threx's empire like a cosmic joke gone horribly right. "Let's give them something to laugh about," Myra said, her fingers dancing across her screen. "And maybe, for once, it won't be us." "Here's hoping," Jackson replied, though hope was about as foreign to him as a vacation on a tropical beach. As the campaign took shape, they uploaded the memes into the system. The plan was simple: flood the psychic network with humor so potent, so irresistible, that not even the warlord's iron will could withstand it. It was like trying to slay a dragon with a rubber chicken, but hey, stranger things had happened. "Launch in 3, 2, 1, Jackson announced, slamming the final command with the vigor of a man who had nothing left to lose. The memes shot out across the network like a virus, infecting every terminal, every screen, every neural interface with a burst of pure, unadulterated mockery. It was beautiful in its absurdity, a digital storm breaking against the fortress of Threx's mind. Reports started trickling in, a symphony of chaos playing out on their screens. Threx's drones were faltering, their programming unable to process the influx of humor. Orders were lost in translation, the psychic link between warlord and army smeared with the viral grease of sarcasm. "Looks like Threx's forces are about as organized as a drunk at a spelling bee," Vex commented, eyes following the chaos with a gleam of satisfaction. Jackson couldn't help but smirk, a rare moment of triumph in a universe determined to grind them into dust. "We might be onto something here, or we're about to get vaporized," Myra added, ever the optimist. "Either way," Jackson said, "at least we'll go out with a bang, or a laugh, I guess." The network buzzed with activity, each new report a testament to the power of their campaign. Threx's control was unraveling like a badly knit sweater, and the people were rising, their spirits buoyed by the realization that the warlords weren't invincible. "People across the fragment are getting the message," Myra reported, her voice tinged with awe. "They're laughing, actually laughing. Threx's psychic lockdown is crumbling." "It's the universal language," Vex declared, leaning back in his chair with a sigh of contentment. "You can't beat a good punchline. Time to kick it up a notch," Jackson said, feeling the momentum shift in their favor. "Let's see if we can't turn this trickle into a flood." They worked like men and women possessed, each meme a calculated strike against the facade of Threx's power. It was a war of attrition, fought with wit instead of weapons, and for the first time it felt like they were winning. The psychic network was a cacophony of laughter and confusion. Threx's empire was teetering, the once unyielding structure riddled with cracks. Reports from across the Dyson fragment indicated that this wasn't just a blip, it was a full-scale collapse. "Looks like Threx's empire is about as stable as a sandcastle in a hurricane," Vex quipped, eyes gleaming with a manic sort of joy. Jackson nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "It's working, it's actually working." But even amidst their success, a shadow loomed on the periphery of their victory. Threx wasn't beaten yet, and a cornered animal was always the most dangerous. "We can't let up," Myra warned, her gaze darting between the screens. "He's not going to take this lying down." "And neither are we," Jackson replied, determination hardening in his chest like an iron resolve. "We keep pushing. We keep fighting." The Iors stretched on, the rebellion's fervor unrelenting. They hammered away at Threx's network, each blow calculated to further destabilize his control. The memes became more than just jokes. They were symbols, rallying cries for those who had been beaten down for too long. As the first light of a distant sun crept over the bunker's horizon, they pressed forward, exhaustion hanging heavy in the air but determination burning brighter than ever. The reports coming in now spoke of outright rebellion, Threx's forces in chaos, his empire unraveling at the seams. "Looks like Threx's grip is slipping," Vex said, his voice a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. "The memes are spreading faster than a plague. And just as deadly," Jackson added, running a hand through hair that was more grease than anything else at this point. The screen flickered with an incoming transmission, a live feed from one of the fragment's towns. It showed a crowd gathered, laughter and cheers echoing off the steel structures that loomed above them like silent guardians. "Myra, patch it through," Jackson instructed, watching as she brought it up on the main screen. The image stabilized, and there they were, the people of the Dyson fragment standing together, united in their defiance. It was a sight to behold, a testament to the power of their humor, their resilience. For too long we've been under their thumb, a voice shouted from the crowd, broadcast across the network with a clarity that cut through the static. But no more. Today we take back our freedom. The cheers that followed were a wave, washing over the bunker like a physical force. Jackson could feel the energy, the hope. It was infectious, a reminder of why they fought. "Looks like we started something big," Vex said, a note of pride threading through his usual sarcasm. "It's not over yet," Jackson reminded him, though his heart was lighter than it had been in years. "But it's a damn good start." As they watched the screen, the network buzzing with reports of rebellion and resistance, Jackson allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide against an enemy that had seemed insurmountable. It wouldn't be easy. The warlords would come back swinging, desperate to regain control. But for now, the universe was on their side, and that was enough. "We've given them something to think about," Myra said, eyes fixed on the screen. "Something they'll never forget. And we did it with jokes," Vex added, shaking his head in disbelief. "Who knew?" Jackson turned away from the screen, looking around at his ragtag band of rebels. They were tired, worn down by the fight, but there was a fire in their eyes that hadn't been there before, a spark of hope, of determination. "We've still got a long way to go," Jackson said, though a smile tugged at his lips. "But we're not alone. And that makes all the difference." The rebellion had begun, a movement fueled by humor and defiance. Threx's empire was crumbling, his once unassailable power reduced to a joke, and in the ashes of his control, the people of the Dyson fragment were rising, ready to reclaim their future. As the screen continued to flicker with reports of their victory, Jackson felt something shift within him. A lightness, an easing of the burden he'd carried for so long. They'd made their stand, and for once the universe was laughing with them, not at them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them fighting another day. And in a universe as grim and unforgiving as theirs, that was the biggest joke of all. In the aftermath of their meme-driven coup, Jackson found himself staring at the ceiling of their bunker, which, ironically, had more cracks than Threx's crumbling empire. Myra sat across from him, fiddling with a busted neural interface, her expression somewhere between exhaustion and grim satisfaction. "Well," Jackson began, breaking the silence that had settled like a bad hangover. "That was something," Myra snorted. "We've done the impossible. We brought down a psychic warlord with the collective power of bad jokes. Don't forget the memes," Jackson added, a smirk tugging at his lips. "The internet's eternal gift to humanity. Turns out, slapstick humor and cat pictures are the ultimate weapons." He watched as Myra nodded, her fingers never pausing in their work. She was the type who couldn't sit still even if the universe paid her to take a day off. "I guess we proved that humor really is universal. Or at least, it's universal in making power-hungry maniacs look like idiots." Jackson rubbed his eyes, wondering if he'd ever sleep again. "And speaking of idiots, I'm sure Threx is somewhere foaming at the mouth, plotting his revenge." "Not our problem right now," Myra said, finally looking up. "We've got bigger issues than Threx's bruised ego. Yeah, like a Dyson fragment full of people who suddenly have freedom thrust upon them. That's not terrifying at all." Myra chuckled dryly. "Sounds like someone's having a midlife crisis." "You're not going to start wearing civilian clothes, are you?" Jackson pretended to shudder. "No thanks, I don't have a death wish." "Good. You'd look as out of place as Threx in that polka dot ensemble. Seriously, who dresses that guy? His stylist must be a war criminal." They shared a laugh, the kind that only comes after surviving a near-apocalyptic ordeal. Outside the bunker, the Dyson fragment was waking up to a new dawn, the kind that wasn't shadowed by warlord rule. People were stumbling out of their homes, blinking in disbelief at the prospect of a day not dictated by fear. "Think they'll manage?" Jackson asked, nodding towards the makeshift screens displaying snippets of life outside. "Not sure. But they've got a fighting chance now, thanks to us." Myra leaned back, crossing her arms. "And if they can't, well, they're in good company." "Good company? You mean the kind that's just as clueless as they are?" "Exactly. Misery loves company, remember. Myra grinned, the expression more wolfish than reassuring. Jackson sighed, kicking at a loose piece of equipment. We've torn down the old order. Now we have to figure out how to build something new, something that doesn't suck. Always the optimist, Myra shot back. Look, we've given them a start. If nothing else, they can at least complain about their newfound freedom on social media. Right. If people aren't whining, are they really free? They both sat in companionable silence, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over them like a heavy, comforting blanket. The world wasn't fixed by any means, but it wasn't as broken as it had been yesterday. So, what's next? Myra asked, breaking the silence. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, grimacing at the greasy state of it. We find the next threats, I suppose. There's always another power-hungry lunatic waiting in the wings. Great, Myra said, rolling her eyes. And here I was hoping for a vacation. Maybe a nice trip to a non-hostile planet. Dream on. We signed up for the long haul, remember? Yeah. Save the universe, one meme at a time. Jackson chuckled, feeling a rare lightness in his chest. I suppose we did prove the pen is mightier than the sword. Or at least, the meme is mightier than the psychic death laser. Myra laughed, a sound that was music in the otherwise tense silence that had filled their lives for so long. As long as we don't have to fight any more warlords with dad jokes, I'm happy. Deal, Jackson said, extending a grease-stained hand. To fewer dad jokes and more victories. Myra took his hand, shaking it firmly. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of peace. The bunker echoed with the sound of their laughter, a sound as rare and precious as life itself in a universe determined to crush them. But for now, they had each other, a Dyson fragment on the mend, and the promise of a future they might actually want to live in. Think we'll ever have a quiet day? Jackson mused, leaning back in his chair, feeling it creak ominously beneath him. Quiet days are for the dead, Myra replied, a glint of mischief in her eyes. Besides, if we had nothing to worry about, what would we do? Start a knitting club? Pass. I'd rather take my chances with the next warlord, spoken like a true masochist. Myra grinned, tossing the broken neural interface aside. But seriously, maybe we could actually fix this place. Get it running like a decent society. Decent society, huh? You're more optimistic than I thought. Hey, if we don't make plans for the future, it's gonna suck when it gets here. Myra's expression softened, a rare moment of vulnerability slipping through her usual shield of sarcasm. We've gotta try, Jackson. Otherwise, what was all this for? He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Yeah, you're right. We've got a chance to make something better. That's more than most people get. The screens flickered again, a new report coming through. It was a feed from a nearby settlement, the camera panning over a gathering of people standing around a makeshift stage. A young woman stepped up, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. We did this, she said, her words crackling through the speakers. We stood up and said enough. And now it's time to build something new. Jackson watched, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This was what they'd fought for, why they'd risked everything. The chance to change the narrative from one of oppression to one of hope. And maybe, just maybe, they'd succeeded. Looks like they're taking the lead, Myra observed, her eyes fixed on the screen. Guess we're not as indispensable as we thought. Good, Jackson replied. The universe could use a few more heroes who aren't us, agreed. But until then, we've got a job to do. Right, let's get to it. The rebellion wasn't over, not by a long shot. But they'd won the first battle, and that was enough to keep them going. Jackson and Myra stood, ready to face the challenges that awaited them, armed with nothing more than their wits, their humor, and the determination to see things through. Outside, the Dyson fragment was alive with possibility, each person a part of a tapestry of potential. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and they'd fight to keep it that way. To the future, Jackson said, raising an imaginary glass. Myra clinked her own invisible glass against his. To the future. And all the memes we'll make along the way. The universe might be grim and dark, but for the first time, it felt like they had a chance to make it a little brighter. And that was a future worth fighting for.